I'm Lacy Davis, and I have with me here Mrs. Dillard Rolston, or as we know her, Ms. Louetta Rolston. And I'm going to ask her some questions and ask her to talk about the past that's gone by. She knows a whole lot more than some of the rest of us does. And I'll probably be prompting her and asking some questions during the time, but we'll let her talk. And Ms. Rolston, if you'll start out and tell about what your maiden name was, about your family, who was in your family, and anything you want to tell about your family. Mm-hmm. And if you'll just talk naturally and look at Jane as you're talking up there, and I'll have it turned over to you now.
Okay. Well, I'm Louetta Rolston, the daughter of G.L. Gillespie and Betty Smith Gillespie, and I am 89 years old, and I have lived in Pittsburg ever since I was 2 years old.
Tell about your brothers and sisters.
And I have two sisters, Viola and Venice. Then I have a brother, Orita, and I had a younger brother, Lexa, who was killed in a car accident when he was 19.
Okay, now you want to tell about where they lived here and what your daddy did, or when he came to Texas? Or came down to this area, rather?
Well, my father came from Georgia. He and his family came from Georgia, and his wife and his. And my father had a blacksmith shop, operated for years here on Mill Street, next to our home, and he built the home about 1905 or 6, I think, and it is still there, used as an art museum. And my sister Viola passed away about 26 years ago, and so did my mother in 1962, and my father in 1944. And we have lived there ever since I was 2, and my sister Venice was born there, and my little brother Lexa was born there. And we were raised up there, and my grandchildren lived there part of the time. David Rolston lived there part of the time with my mother after my father passed away.
Now, Ms. Rolston, your husband was Dillard Rolston. Tell us about when you married and what he was doing when you married, or about that time, and then take off on the railroad and tell about that.
Okay. I married Dillard Rolston in February the 2nd, 1922, and he was just out of World War, being discharged from the Navy in World War I, and he was a Mount Pleasant boy and the father of Butler Rolston, who was also a lawyer. Butler Rolston had 5 sons, and they were all lawyers. He was a lawyer, and all 5 sons was a lawyer. He has a grandson that is a lawyer, and he also has a great-grandson who is a lawyer. Dillard came here from Mount Pleasant as a clerk for the Cotton Belt Railroad, and he had only 2 years seniority when he came here. And he remained with the railroad until he had 44 years of service. But in the 1930s, he passed the bar examination, and he later served in the legal department of the railroad. And
okay, now tell about what his job was to railroad. And
well, he was a telegrapher clerk for the Cotton Belt Railroad, and during the Depression we lived all up and down the Cotton Belt Railroad, from Texarkana to Gatesville in between, and from Mount Pleasant to Fort Worth and in between. And then later, after he got his license to practice law, he worked in the legal department of the railroad, in which capacity he served until he retired.
Okay, now tell about your children.
Well, Dillard and I have 2 children. Mary Helen Rolston, she married Wilton Gravely, and they have 2 sons, and one of so the younger son is a lawyer. And then I have a son, Butler Rolston, and he is in the transportation department business in San Antonio at the present time.
Okay, Ms. Rolston, now, anything else about the railroad that you think would be interesting to tell? We recently saw one of the 800s come through here, and we know that at one time they did have passenger trains on the Cotton Belt as well as on the LNA. LNA is what I call it. And recently we did see the 800, rebuilt 819 come through here. We did see it. And of course we're all interested in the depot, trying to save it. And tell me what you just heard about that depot down there, and we'll put you on the spot, is somebody on the spot, is when it's built.
Well, the depot, the Cotton Belt Depot was built in 1900, I've been told, but it was here before I ever lived in Pittsburg. So I was 2 years old before I came here, but it has been there quite a while. I don't know anything about the building before that, what kind of building they had.
Okay, let's talk about the people who worked with Mr. Rolston there at the railroad. You want to tell them about them? I know Mr. Malcolm at one time was the agent there and for quite a number of years.
Yeah, Dillard served as a clerk operator a number of times in this depot here. Of course, from time to time he would be bumped and went to other places, but he always managed to come back to Pittsburg every chance he got. And Mr. Malcolm served as agent while he worked as telegrapher clerk. And also my son worked as telegrapher clerk at the Cotton Belt. And Mr. Malcolm was agent at that time. Now, at one time, Earl Garrison was the agent, one of the earlier agents of the Cotton Belt. And we have had just very few after Mr. Malcolm. He served a long term until he retired. He came.
Now, I guess then Mr. O'Quinn was agent, right?
Yes, Mr. O'Quinn served as agent, and
Mr. Gaston.
And Mr. Gaston, I believe, was the last agent.
C.C. Gaston.
C.C. Gaston. And then at one time we had an agent in there that was named Truitt. And I think before Mr. Garrison, or following Mr. Garrison, we had a Mr. Robinson.
So that was way back kind of before Mr. Malcolm's time.
That was before Mr. Malcolm's time. And
now, recent times, Mr. O'Neill, T.K. O'Neill, was he agent?
Well, no, Mr. O'Neill came in here as telegrapher clerk.
I see.
But he did serve as agent at Commerce until his retirement.
I see.
3 or 4 years ago. But he was never agent here.
Okay, let's go from the railroad now back to the fairgrounds. What can you tell us about the Northeast Texas Fair, about the first time you ever saw or heard of it?
Well, it used to be the big event of Pittsburg was the Northeast Texas Fair, and it ranked as second in the state next to the Dallas Fair. And it was a big event every fall and attracted lots of people, and regular special trains were run in from all 4 directions here on both railroads, bringing people in for special days. And we had a good displays of the agriculture and other cultural parts of the county, and it was a big event for the school children. I know we all had season tickets, and we went every night and walked that cement walk from corner to corner and all through the exhibit hall. We saw them dozens of times and enjoyed it every time.
To your recollection, who were the directors, or were you familiar with who the directors of the fair
Well, the first I remember, I believe it was Mr. J.W. Hill. Is that Buddy Hill's and them father? I believe he was one of the organizers.
No, that was,
And then Mr. Maddox later served.
yes.
Wasn't Mr. Hill one of the organizers?
Well, he may have been, but that was not J.W. I don't believe it was his initials.
Buddy Hill's daddy.
I can't think of what his name was now.
Minnie Garrett used to have charge of the, that's not on, is it?
Yes, it was. Ms. Rolston and I were talking as we had the camera off just a moment ago. I believe Mr. J.W. Hill was the person she was referring to as director of the fair and possibly one of the organizers. Now, he was a father of Alton Hill. Alton Hill was a father of Buddy Hill. I'll get that straight while we're on here. And she was telling a little more about something that happened at the fair. And go ahead, Ms. Rolston, and tell what you told me a little bit ago about going to the fair and about the announcement made out there about Gordon Madison.
Well, the fair, Northeast Texas Fair, was the second largest in the state of Texas next to the Dallas Fair, and it was a big event every fall. And all the children had season tickets, and they went I think every night after school, and stayed till it closed up in the evening. Everybody enjoyed it so. And they had races.
Now, I know that in the earlier part they had horse races out there. Then later they had Model T cars or that order cars racing out there, as I recall. Now, tell about this announcement over there about Gordon.
Well, we were at the horse races at the grandstand, and the news came in about Gordon Madison's death, who was killed in World War I. And Miss Madison was seated in the audience, and she was called out from the audience and was given the news of the death of her son who'd been killed in the service. He was the first boy from Camp County that was killed in the service, World War I.
Now, I believe you were, sometime a few months ago, you were showing some ribbons that were won out at the fair. Did you won those personally for some of your work out there?
Oh yes, I made lots of handwork exhibits, embroidery and things like that, sewing. And I usually got blue ribbons or red ribbons. And recently, they were displayed at our
Pioneer Days.
Pioneer Days. And I had the original ribbons and also the original articles that won the ribbons on display.
Well, that's good. You were also mentioning a while ago Mr. Davenport's name as possibly being one of the organizers and early day officers in the fair organization. Now, I recall that there was I believe it was Bob Davenport that had an exhibit out there along with Mr. John Lightfoot. And was he kin to
Mr.
J.W.?
Bob Davenport was J.W. Davenport's brother.
I see.
And he taught school here at one time, and I was in his class.
I see. Now, let's go away from the fair a little bit and talk about your school. Now, where did you start school? Where was the building at that?
Well, I started the school at a private school. Miss H.Y. Black had a little private school up here in Pittsburg, where the First State Bank is located now. One little one-room school with a white picket fence around it. Well, old Rita, my brother, and I attended school there for 2 years before we went to public school. And then we went to school in what was known as the old Jeff Davis College. And I attended there through the 6th grade, and then the new school building over on Lafayette Street was built. And that's where I graduated from in 1917.
Now, did Mr. Black and Mrs. Black both teach schools at separate places here?
Yes, Mr. Black taught in the country, and Miss Black taught in town.
Now,
he didn't teach with her in this.
reason I asked that question, I have an old picture that was made of Mr. Black's students, and I was told that this was at a building just below where the Baptist church is located now. Can you enlighten me a little on that? Do you still think he was in the country where he taught?
Well, I don't remember ever a school around the Baptist church, and all I remember, Mr. Black, it was in the rural area.
Okay, then that corrects what I had heard beforehand. I'm glad to get that straightened out. Now, you finished school here in Pittsburg?
I finished high school here in 1917.
1917, and then you got married a couple of years later?
5 years later.
5 years later?
1922. There was only 10 in our high school graduating class at that time, 2 boys and 8 girls.
How about that? Now, you told me recently about Mrs. Broach and her connections here. Tell us about Mrs. Broach or the Broach family, what you know about them.
The Broach family?
Broach family, yes.
Well, L.B. Broach went to school here, but he and Walter Smith left. They finished the 11th grade, 10th grade, and went to school at Virginia Military Academy. And so he didn't finish high school here. George Black finished high school here, and Ross Bryson was the only 2 boys in that class. And that finished in 1917. Now, the Broach family, I don't know much about them, except they lived out here at the edge of town. And after he left school, they had an older girl, RMA, but she was older and wasn't attending school when I was attending school. She was out of school, I suppose. Okay.
Now, you mentioned the Madisons a while ago. Now, the Madisons, I recall, they ran a variety store here, didn't they? Some kind of store like that?
Yes, they did a short time. He had a variety store there on down close to Brother Lon Morris's bank, right in there. And he had these 3 children, Gordon and Mary and Marguerite. Now, Mary died early in there from an appendectomy. She was maybe 12 years old or something like that.
I see.
Very young.
Now, you mentioned Lon Morris. What do you remember about him? Now, whatever you remember, go ahead and tell it now, because I've heard some things that people thought about him, and so I don't think it'd be anything wrong in going ahead and tell what your opinion was of him.
Well, Brother Lon Morris was a beloved character in Pittsburg. In fact, I was named after Brother Lon Morris, and he had a bank that was unincorporated. It was an unincorporated bank, and he done a lot of business with it. And they had been friends, the Morrises, of my family for years, as long as he lived.
Didn't he come from around Winsboro or that direction, or not?
I don't know if he came from Winsboro or not, but he did have a son that lived at Winsboro one time, Morris.
That's about where I got that.
The son lived there.
I see.
But Miss Morris was a sister to Dr. Ellington, Miss Lula Morris.
Yes.
And
now, I believe I remember that the Ellingtons lived at one time upstairs near the bank there. Did they own that building there? Or?
I don't know who owned the building, but they did live up there because Miss May Ellington was my piano teacher, and that's where I went for lessons. And they lived there for several years, and they also had 2 rooms up above Brother Lon Morris's bank that Dr. Ellington used as hospital rooms.
Oh, I see.
I have a cousin that was born there.
I see. Now, I know that we had an attorney here by the name of Clyde Hull, and he had his offices up there in that same building. What else do you remember about that building that offices in that particular building up there. What else was up there? Do you recall?
Yes, there used to be a Mr. and Miss, is it J.C. Boyd, that lived here, and they lived at one time up there. They did live out in the Duke community, and as they got older, they moved upstairs in that building.
Now, was that the photographer?
No, I don't know what Mr. Boyd did. He had a farm, and at one time Miss Boyd told me he was a sailor.
I see.
And they lived there, and Miss Billigan looked after them. You know.
I recall some of the old pictures that I've had seem to be made around the turn of the century, from there to about 1910, and I believe they had J.D. Boyd as photographer there. And I've been told since then that Julian Lockett, who was photographer here for many years, started working for him or helping him when he was a youngster. And he started in business there to Mr. Boyd's job.
Well, that building you're talking about was on the...
Cross street.
It was across the street,
Yes.
And it was a J.C., I don't know what Boyd, it was a Boyd photographer there. And I think Julian Lockett did start there.
Well, that's what I had.
And it later burned. That building burned.
It burned before they built the post office there.
It did. It's right out where the post office was.
Yes. Okay. Now, can you think of anyone else right now that you, or anything you need to tell about Pittsburg, about any of the merchants in Pittsburg that you recall when they were here when you were young, or?
Well, Mr. W.L. Wooten had a grocery store.
That's W.T. Wooten.
W.T. Wooten. And he seemed like our most popular grocery at that time, store.
Now, E.P. Wooten, his son, brought me a picture here not long ago, and he says that store was originally over there near the bank on that side of the street too, when they first came here. And later they moved it on the back street back there on Marshall Street.
Yeah.
Now, do you recall it being over there on the front street?
Yeah, I'll tell you where it was.
In looking over these old pictures, I see a number of businesses that were located at one time different places, and I noticed that Keelan Tailor Shop was originally over there on that side of the street, over there where B&S Hardware is now, in that area over there. And so Wooten's was over there and later moved to the back street, and Keelan's was over there, then later moved across the street too.
Well, first time I remember Keelan's Tailor Shop, they were right next to Clark Brothers grocery store.
Oh, is that right?
Yes.
They were further up the street then?
Yeah. And Mr. Wooten, there was a carpenter in Wooten, and I remember them being down where Dr. Pendergrass's office is.
Is that right? Well, I don't recall that name. Now, we hear quite a bit about the
This
hot meat.
carpenter was DeWitt Carpenter's brother, Mr. Will Carpenter.
But DeWitt Carpenter later run a grocery store down next to Lon Morris's bank,
That's right.
down where the Ellingtons lived in the lower part of that building, as I recall. Do you know how long he ran that store?
Mr. Carpenter?
Uh-huh.
Oh, when we married in 1922, he was there. And no, I don't remember exact, but a number of years.
Well, he must have been there up till the 30s, somewhere anyway,
But
as I
when we were
recall.
married there, because we had an apartment with DeWitt, Mr. and Miss DeWitt Carpenter,
I see.
when we first married.
Now we hear quite a bit now about the hot link business. Do you recall Mr. Hasselback's market?
Yes, I
And
sure
where it was exactly?
Well, it was located just about where the hot link joint is now, and he originated those. He of the hot links there. That's all. No, he had a market. I remember first up there about where Sears is moved out of.
Okay, that's what I had heard, and I'd also heard that he was at one time in a small building across the street, or across over there on the back. Beyond Charles Junior Truett's over there. I don't know, I'd heard that.
There was a meat market over there, but Mr. Garland Burnham had run that.
I see.
I don't think Mr. Hasselback was connected with that.
Okay, Mr. Hasselback then was down about where our late Sears store was at first. Then they moved on the back street.
Mm-hmm.
I see. Uh, W.L. Garrett, do you remember? You remember them, I'm sure, and their store.
Yes, it's been there a long time. As long as I can remember, there has been nothing there but W.L. Garrett's store. And then W.A. Smith, who was a relative of Mr. Garrett's, had a store over there about where Red Parker's place is now.
Yes, I understand that. In looking back through some history, I found that they were partners at one time and came to Pittsburgh, I believe, in about 1895 or something like that, and operated a store about where B&S is over there, or in that block down there originally, but was there only a short time before they dissolved partnership.
Well, I can't. He's been on that corner ever since I could remember, and right across the street, Hopkins' Grammar had a store.
Yes, that's the building where the Coca-Cola sign just been recently been painted on. Hopkins Grammar, and they were store there. I guess they were there. Did they have a department store, more or less, like Garrett's? Or?
It was like Garrett's
I
department
see.
store.
Then Abernathy across the street was still another one. So on the three corners there, we had similar stores.
That's right.
For a number of years, all three of them.
Abernathy's store carried a larger stock, I think. He had one part of his building, especially men's clothing, where Jewel Garrett's place was. That was all men's clothing. And they had a milliner's shop upstairs, and Miss Jessie Mallory was the milliner for a while, and then the earliest one I remember there was Miss Sue Bass.
Now that was in an Abernathy store?
Up in that balcony.
I see.
Then later Miss Sue had moved her shop to Nelson and Berry's building, which originally was a Jesse Greer department store.
I see.
And Mr. Nelson moved from across the street where Mike Bennett's outlet shop is now. That was where I first remember Mr. Nelson's place. And J.B. Greer sold out to Mr. Nelson.
Okay, now that is the building we referred to as the Maddox building now, and if you're talking about where Mike Bennett was back on the back street?
No, right across the street where the State Bank was.
Where the State Bank went, okay. Okay, that's in the corner there. Okay, now back where the Maddox building is, where we know it as next where Lumberyard used to be back there, Mabin's, the last one's there. Do you recall what was there before that building was built? Somebody told me that years ago that there was a wagon yard or something on that order there. Do you recall that?
Yes, there was a livery stable.
Livery stable,
There was a big livery stable there.
Do you recall who run it?
No, I don't. And then a little further up, there was a hotel.
A hotel. Now that was up about where the Texaco station is?
No, it's about where Red Parker's warehouse is.
Oh, I see. That was in the King block, we call it there?
Well, it's on Church Street. Isn't that Church Street? Back on there?
Well, yes, yes. You're right. But now there was a hotel, the Hightower Hotel, as I'm told, was over near where the Bryson service station is.
It's where the Bates boy lives now.
I see. Deb Duncan.
Yeah,
where he
Duncan
lives now. And then
and that cedar tree there was there, and it's still standing. It was in the yard when the Hightower Hotel was there.
I see. Now.
And the Hightower Hotel, originally there was a Ms. Wakefield that lived there and owned it.
Okay. Now, that building, I'm told, burned.
It burned.
Do you recall when it burned?
No, I don't. I don't remember the year.
I'm going to say it's back in the 20s, I recall. I don't remember exactly the building did. I don't know if it was a hotel, that used the hotel when it burned or not. But
yes, I think it was. No, it wasn't. It was apartment house.
Apartment house, that's what I was
Claude
thinking.
Clayton lived there. I remember him living in the apartment house. I don't remember anybody else that lived there, but I remember Claude did.
I see. Well, now, back on the Marshall Street back there across from the depot. The building there that, well, at one time it was lumber yard. I think now Holman uses a warehouse now. But before that, there was a hotel there. Now, that's across the street from Clayton Hotel now. And that was a Thomas Hotel, I'm told. Do you remember anything about it?
Oh, yes, I remember the Thomas Hotel and Mr. and Ms. Thomas and their family. They operated that hotel for a number of years there.
Okay, now, do you remember who ran the hotel, or was it a hotel before they started, or do you recall?
Seemed like it was, but I don't remember. They were there when we came to Pittsburgh.
I see.
And then next to it, down toward Pullman, was the livery stable, a livery stable, I believe.
Do you remember who ran it?
Well, I remember one, Mr. Cotton, run it.
I see.
And he had a son named Wirt Cotton that married Ray Hasselback.
Yes. All that, and I think he was a butcher at one time too, wasn't he? Where it was.
Well, I don't know. After he and Ray first married, they lived in Dallas a while, and he was a streetcar operator.
I see.
And then they came back to Pittsburgh. He might have worked, I think he did work with Mr. Hasselback, particularly in the butchering department, in the slaughterhouse part.
I was thinking he did, is what I had heard. Now, more grocery company buildings, which were across the street there and still standing there. What was there originally? Do you know?
Yes, when we came there, that was just an open space that had a blacksmith shop on it. And my uncle, Uncle Bud Smith, run that shop, and Sam Murphy for a while.
I see. Now, the Pitt Cemetery, I have heard of it, and I know you lived close to it when you were growing up. I went to it recently, Jane and I did, for the first time since I've been living here. Now there's a little house right next to it there. Was that...
Is that a little brick house?
No, I think it's a wooden house. It's between it and the railroad track. I was told by someone, I may have been you, that that was a servant's quarters at one time.
Well, I think it was. I think, you know, Hill and Hess had a grocery store, a wholesale grocery, where the Ford house is now there.
Right.
And I think that is someone that worked for them that lived there. Now, I'm not sure about that. I know later there was the colored family lived there.
I see. Well, now, what was there where Hess and Hill and the Ford company was before Hess and Hill was there? Do you recall?
Well, there was a automobile mechanic place there, and it was run by Mr. Thompson and Calvin. He lived at Lufkin, married Gladys Nix.
Well,
I can't recall the name right now.
you know what you've done.
Cochran.
Okay, now, someone called here about a year ago and asked me a question and said that they had heard or been told that there was a pottery shop down near where either there or down the railroad track there, possibly down towards where Mr. Thorcell's place was. Do you ever remember anything like that?
No, I don't remember anything about a pottery.
Well, I didn't either, and so I thought maybe that was just a blind lead and they were trying to check it out.
But now where the Texaco filling station is now, there used to be a lumber yard there.
Now, you say Texaco, you mean Bryson's?
Bryson's.
Okay, it's not
Shamrock.
Texaco now, it's something else.
Shamrock Station.
Yeah. There used to be a lumber yard
There
there.
used to be a lumber yard there.
Do you know who run it?
I think a Denman.
Denman?
There was a man there, lived there, that worked for him, was named Calicut.
I see.
But I don't think he owned the place. But there was a Mr.
Now,
Calicut.
Denman rent a shop up there where Mabin's was originally up there, right?
Yeah, that's right. He was there too. But now I'm not for sure where he run that. He might have been there before that he went up there where Mabin's place was.
I see.
But when I grew up, he's going to cut off. When
Off a little bit now, and we were discussing some of the people who used to live here in Pittsburg. And Ms. Rolston, I'd like you to tell me what you know about Dick Hewitt. Now, I remember he run a drugstore. Do you remember? Did he do anything else before he ever started that drugstore? Did you remember?
No, I don't remember anything else about Dick until he was in the drugstore. He was in there a number of years. He did have 4 children, and he had a sister, Pauline, who married a first cousin of mine, Eugene Smith.
Okay.
And
Now, he had a brother or two besides that, too.
Dick.
Yeah.
Dick had a brother, Billy Bob.
Yes.
He was one time a keeper of Ferndale Lake.
Yes, and he had a little place down on the Cypress Creek down here.
Fish place.
A little fish place down on Cypress Creek between here and Cason at one time. I remember.
Yeah,
That's
I
about all
don't
I
remember
remember.
that, but I do remember him being out there. And later he went to, he had something like that later, I don't know where, after he left here.
I think he did too. Now, about the Dick Hewitt store, it was there where Becky's shop is now, I believe.
That's right.
And was he there all the time that you recall?
Yes, he did. I remember Barry Capps working in there. I think Barry Capps was the pharmacist at that time. And I think the store really belonged to Mr. Boren, Dr. Boren.
Okay, I was thinking that Bourne was connected there at one time to a...
Yeah, I think at that time, I think maybe Dick just run the store for him, or maybe just, he didn't own the building anyway.
I see.
He didn't own the building.
Okay, now about the other drugstores here in Pittsburgh, what do you recall about some of the older ones that were here?
Well, there used to be a store across the street over close to Clark Brothers. It was J.W. Davenport. Mr. Jerry Davenport had a
Drugstore?
drugstore there.
Okay, that's about where Red Parker is now.
Yeah. See, I think Red Parker's place now, there used to be 3 stores that
Right.
occupied in there.
Yes.
A&P had one, and that W.A. Smith had one, and no, I don't know who had the other one.
Well, there was a barber shop there at one time, as I recall.
Well, that barber shop was on the other side, on the east side of
Yes.
of
Next to Abernathy's store there.
between there and where Jewel Garrett's place was.
Right.
And there used to be a jewelry store there too, a Mr. Johnson. When I was in high school, there was a Mr. Johnson that operated a jewelry store there. He lived on North Avenue in that big 2-story house there on North Avenue.
I see.
I remember he had a blue eye and a brown eye, and he had a daughter, had a daughter Janie that was in my class at school.
And his name is Johnson.
His name was Johnson.
Okay, now Lockett's drugstore, or what now is Foster's Palmore store. How far back can you go back to that? Was it always in more or less the same building there?
Yes, it wasn't as large as it is now. You know, it used to be Lockett and Reynolds.
Yes.
And it wasn't as large. They took in that little Fred building, you know, that H. Fred building. It's taken in there. And
I
that
see.
Fred building belonged to Earl Taylor.
Yes. Okay, way back yonder, do you remember any other drugstores being here?
I don't recall any others.
Of
Taylor.
course, there were some later on. No. Well, let's go back to the
There was
building.
a Crescent drugstore, but
That's the one I was thinking about, Crescent Drugstore. Where was it?
well, I think that's the one J.W. Davenport had.
I see. Okay, the reason I asked you that, I have seen literature on the, bills, old bills had the heading up there, Crescent Drugstore. That's the reason I asked you.
Right on.
Now, There used to be a building which was torn down recently that stood just behind Abernathy building on the corner there. It's a brick building, two-story brick building. And Morris Robertson run a garage in it for a long time. I seem to recall at one time there was a bottling plant there. Am I right?
You're right. There was a bottling works, and Mr. and Miss Cohen operated it. K-O-E-N, Cohen.
Cohen. Okay, was Mr. Pointer in that too, or am I H.E. Pointer? Seemed like I've got that name connected with that too or something. Am I wrong?
Well, he could have been. I don't remember it. Mr. Pointer was worked for the light company.
I see. Well, probably have
with Parvin Swim.
Okay, then Cohen was there. Do you recall anything before he was there?
Well, at one time there was a bicycle shop there operated by Harp Abernathy. That's my first recollection when I went to school at that old Jeff Davis College.
I see. Harp Abernathy, now is that Dave's grandfather?
Yeah. Dave's initials is D.H. Abernathy, and that H stands for Harper.
I see. Well, I think our young Dave, I think that's his name too. I think his name's Harper, middle name's Harper.
Brought on down.
Okay, now wasn't Coca-Cola Bottling Company there one time, or was it? Where was it before they moved where they are now?
Well, I don't know where it's the, yes, Coca-Cola Company. No, it was in the Clayton building.
In the Clayton building.
And the Express office used to be there too. The Express office is, I believe the bottling works was there, and then I believe the Express office came later. And there used to be a Mr. Bevel that run that bottling works there at one time, lived up on Hill Avenue.
I see.
And a Mr. I think there was a Mr. Reedus connected in there too. He was a postmaster. No, he was a letter carrier.
I see.
Mr. Reedus was.
I see.
Had a daughter named Lorene, my age. I remember her. Remember him. And they lived on Hill Avenue, way out, kind of where, right this side of where Bucky Harrison's place is.
Okay, now across the street from the Methodist Church there, where next to this bottling plant building, what was in there? Was the hotel behind, west or north of the bottling plant? You said there's a hotel.
It was west.
West, I see.
And north was residents in there. There was about 4 residents in there.
Okay.
There was Miss Gross that lived in one, and she run a boarding house. And then there was another house, I don't remember who lived in it, and then Miss Minnie Garrett's house. Okay. And then the J.E. Robinson place where that parking is now, where the funeral home was. I
see. Now, Miss Minnie Garrett brings up a recollection to me because she at one time owned this property right where my home is here.
Here.
In fact, she owned quite a bit of property here back many years ago. So, okay, we were talking a little bit about you going to the Jeff Davis College. Do you recall very much about what you studied there, about the school, anything, who your teachers were?
Yeah, I remember one teacher, Miss Leon Trotter. I think I was in the 5th grade. Miss Leon Trotter, and Miss Calamie Abernathy was a history teacher later, the last year that college is in operation. She taught there. And there was a Mr. Thompson that was superintendent, and there's a Mr. Watson. Mr. Watson was superintendent when I first went there, and then later C.L. Turner. And then C.L. Turner taught in the new school when it was built. He transferred over there. He was there a long time. But that Miss Trotter and Miss Calamie Pottridge was the only teachers I remember. There was a Mr. Vault there that was in the athletic department at the old school, that school.
Now you mentioned Miss Calamie Pottridge Abernathy. Do you remember Mr. Pottridge? Where he ran a livery stable, I understand. Do you remember where it was?
You know Mr. Bill Pottridge?
Uh-huh.
No, I don't.
I see. Okay, you're talking about schools. Do you remember the Smith Training School? Now, it was in operation about the same time this other, up on Stafford Hill, as I recall.
Yeah, that's right. Mr. Smith, he had a private school. It was in operation the same time I was going to kindergarten. And then Miss Belle Taylor later had another private school. Is where the old jail was, right there in front of where the courthouse is now.
Now, when you say the old jail, that was the one that had just for the
Well, no,
the ones there now.
the old jail, it was up there on Main Street.
Yes, in front of
Well,
the
this
post office.
was right behind that street.
There was
right
another.
behind.
There was another jail back there. That's built
Yeah,
back
that's the one.
on the.
But before that jail was there was a big old long house there that they said when they'd have court and the jury got tied up and had to stay all night, that's where they stayed.
I see.
They kept them all together there. And Miss Belle Taylor had a schoolhouse there. And there were 3 private schools here at that time.
I see. Now, there was after Ms. Black quit operating this school, there was someone else there ran that same kindergarten there. Miss Carrie Moore, was that her name?
Miss Carrie Moore.
I recall someone telling us she.
Yeah, and Miss Carrie Moore's son married a Laney girl, a sister to Uncle Bunch's wife, Gertrude.
I see.
And let's see, Lee Moore. Her name was Lee.
Okay.
But I had, then after that, there was a music teacher that came here, Miss Carrie Coldwater, that came in here from Lake Charles, Louisiana, and had a piano studio there. My first piano lessons were there, and she taught in that little school of Miss Black's.
Okay, now the this same spot, which is where the west parking lot of this First State Bank is now, that's the lot we're talking about where Ms. Moore's place was and Ms. Black's too. Of course, Miss Black lived behind there, across on the I guess part of the State Bank parking lot, the driveway back there. Now, the Pittsburg service station and Stewart and Howard and Stewart had a building there where they stored potatoes at the back part of that lot, and then the Pittsburg service station was the front. Do you know about when that was built there?
Which, the Pittsburg service station?
Uh-huh.
No, I don't. Of course, the Presbyterian Church was there, you know, when
Yes.
that was the only thing, that was the early thing.
But that was, the Presbyterian Church was in the second lot, and the Pittsburg service station was in the first lot there.
Well,
Next to North Avenue.
This Presbyterian Church adjoined Miss Black's schoolyard,
Yes.
and then was the service station.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, then the Christian church was on down, how far down was it beyond the Presbyterian church?
Just across, well, there wasn't a road there, and you know, when Dillard was mayor, he had that cut into a road there, and the Christian church was right there. It originally had been up where Mr. Couch's insurance company is now.
Yes, it was an old Methodist church there.
It was the old Methodist church, the Christian church was. And Miss Holman gave Dillard the deed to it, and it was moved to this lot there, east of the State Bank now. And it stayed there for a number of years, but never was used for a church until the Church of Christ was organized, and they first held their church services there. First church building they had it in. Of course, they started off in the courthouse and then in the Presbyterian church, and in that building after Miss Holman gave it to them.
I see. Can you think of anything else, Ms. Rolston, that you think would be interesting to tell us right now? If not, we'll bring this to a close. Oh, wait a minute.
Well,
okay, she's taking her microphone off. Go ahead and.
Oh, I haven't taken it off.
Oh, it's still on there. Okay.
I took my glasses.
Can you think of anything else you should?
Well,
think
not
would be
anything
interesting
unless
to-
something you want to know about. I probably know about it.
Well-
I never forget.
We'll bring it to a close for this time, and probably may get you back over another time. And we'd like to thank Mrs. Louetta Rolston for coming with us here today and tell us a little about what happened here in Pittsburg many years ago. And Ms. Rolston, thank you again. We appreciate it very much. And I'm sure that historians or children, students who are looking up their history will be glad to see this and maybe find out something we learned.
Well, I enjoyed talking and remembering again